get the initial thoughts of our panel. Maura Gillespie, Republican strategist, founder of Blue Stack Strategies, and Joy Cheney, Democratic strategist and former Chief of Staff to Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Welcome again to both of you. But Maura, the same question to you. And do you think there is the political will from the very top of US politics to actually get accountability for the victims of Epstein and anyone else who may be found, if anyone else is found guilty of carrying out similar acts?
Unfortunately, no, I don't see that being a top priority for many in the administration. I think to the point you're making here is a question about judgment, but it's also a matter of a timeline. You know, when Alex Acosta, who in the first term of the Trump administration was appointed to be the Secretary of Labor, prior to that, he made the sweetheart deal that Epstein got in 2008. So it was known then that Epstein was a child predator. And yeah, he got some ridiculous deal that through Alex Acosta, they then to be Secretary of Labor. And I think there's a question about correspondence and the Epstein files of who was communicating with Epstein and Maxwell after that, right? I think that that's also a big question. And it does make you wonder the association with the Trump orbit, but also many people like the Clintons and others who have been associated. It does call into question what their judgment was, why they continue to have these affiliations, and why these people of power continue to flourish in their businesses and in their relationships. You know, I do think that that's a question to be considered. You know, Brett Radner, there's other names that are in that file that have continued to be in this orbit that I think is questionable at best. But at the end of the day, the justice for the victims and for them to get accountability, at least here in the United States, feels lacking.
OK, and obviously we do have to repeat and keep repeating that the mention of a particular name in the Epstein files does not necessarily denote or imply any guilt. But of course, there is that desire for accountability, as we have heard from the victims. Yep. Maura, listening to Julie and her comments, you know, she's not seeing any evidence that the Justice Department and prosecutors, investigators took these crimes anywhere close to seriously enough, and that because it was a very wealthy, politically connected man at the heart of it, he was treated differently. Given what she has outlined, do you think there is any hope for justice for the victims of Epstein?
I'd like to be an optimist and say that, yes, they will have some justice brought to them. But I have doubts, unfortunately, because money and power and greed is still very much a factor. And we're seeing that with those who are around the orbit, who have been listed in the files, and their association largely came down to what could benefit them. And I think you really haven't seen culturally until the last, I would say the last 5 to 10 years, this recognition of the severity of these situations. And again, at the end of the day, this is talking about pedophilia. And what this is it's a crime, obviously, but it's a heinous one at that. And I do think that us looking at it with fresh eyes, yes, maybe the courts won't hold them as accountable as we would like, but the court of public opinion certainly will and should.
Hearing, she wants transparency. She wants this to be televised. Maura, what can we expect here? Maybe quite the spectacle, it seems, hearing from these former, high-profile politicians.
I mean, I think it's the last play that she has right now. I do think that they put themselves in this corner by stalling and trying to get themselves a deal for months. They said they worked behind the scenes with the committee to try and negotiate, but more or less they tried to use public opinion in their favor. And a few weeks back, they put out a statement saying they were going to fight this, because they were going to fight for America. It came across to me as pretty tone deaf, given the fact that they're just fighting for themselves and for their reputations and for what will be an embarrassing moment for Bill Clinton. I do think that the committee is probably questioning whether or not it makes the most sense to do this publicly, because in a few years' time, if the gavel is no longer in the Republicans' hands, President Trump may be very well in the same position as the Clintons. And you can tell that that's sort of on the minds of both the administration and the committee chairman. But I think more or less talking about the Clintons in this capacity, going after Bill Clinton makes sense to me in this one way, but going after Hillary Clinton does feel a little bit political in nature. And So I don't disagree with her attempts to try and push back on them.
That's been the accusation, of course, from the Clintons, is that this is mostly politically motivated. And of course, just because they show up in these files, again, does not mean that there's any criminal wrongdoing here. And that's been denied, of course, by the Clintons.
Maura, why do you think the change of tone from the president? Was it really about a phone call with Keir Starmer, or is it more about him thinking, well, actually, I can retain the right to secure American interests in the future here if anything goes awry?
I wish I could say it's the latter, but I do think it's just a matter of how easy it is to convince the president if you talk to him in the right manner. And that doesn't bode well for our foreign policy. I do think there is a concern here. And you're seeing some Republicans talk about the concern of what this concedes to China and the role that China will continue to play on the world stage as the U.S. abandons some of its, standings. I have concerns about that as a, foreign policy person on the Republican side of the party. I do think that that's concerning. The role that we play in the world is important. And to see the president concede on that is troubling at best. But this phone call itself just shows that he can be convinced, and that instability of policymaking has probably the reason why many of our allies are concerned and have questions about where the president stands from 1 minute to the next.
Yeah, Maura, what do you make of what appears to be some diplomatic work on behalf of the Trump administration when it comes to trying to at least join up again with Russia and communicate between the two militaries?
Personally, I think I'll always struggle with treating Russia as if they're an equal partner in this, because they are the aggressor. They are the ones who went in and attacked Ukraine and committed war crimes. So I think that that's hard to just to consider them as an equal partner in negotiations. With that being said, it is important for the world order that there is an agreement and in writing, something to be said about the nuclear treaty having expired, like you mentioned, in 2021. And that time that it's been, this gap of time has been concerning for not just the United States, but for those in our allies around the world. And so I do think that having that conversation, as Joy pointed out, is important. Those lines of communication being open and receptive audiences, that's always encouraging. I just think that, when we think about what's happening in Ukraine and the onslaught that Russia has continued to commit, without ceasing, despite any phone calls or conversations that the presidents between Putin and Trump may have, I see this as a positive step forward, and I hope that it, snowballs into a greater effort of Russia recognizing their role and dialing back what's been an atrocious assault on the Ukrainian people.
And Maura, the famous kind of masthead on the Washington Post, the slogan, "Democracy dies in darkness." What do you think these big cuts to the Washington Post mean for what, is often called the fourth branch of government, for journalism here?
Well, it certainly seems pretty ominous for that to be coming to fruition. I would hope that democracy does not die with this cut, but I do think that you're seeing that reaction by so many people who are either personally impacted or who are in D.C., because it is such an institution within the district there in Washington. And I do think that the juxtaposition between what's going on in terms of what Jeff Bezos, who you mentioned, who owns the paper, what he's been spending millions upon millions on, a documentary about the First Lady, and then this comes the same weekend of that, announcement. It's a little harsh to be kind of looking at the two things side by side. And I think that for many newspapers around the country, they empathize with the fact that they have to make cuts that are painful and not something they want to do but have to do. I think that in this case, it feels a little bit more extreme given the wealth of Jeff Bezos. I would say that my, sympathies are with the reporters especially who are around the world. I saw many tweets or posts talking about being cut on the job out in Ukraine or places covering war. And I feel for them because it is it's a painful situation all around. And, you kind of do wonder what happens now in terms of the need for good reporting and for good journalism, and how is that being rewarded? It does cause a bit of a question here for us in the United States, and if we continue to cut down that workforce.
Jeff Bezos, who bought the paper, about a minute left. Do you think the rich and powerful should be allowed to own these types of news outlets?
Well, they're certainly the ones who are capable of purchasing it. And I think that you're going to see more of that. They are doing very well in Trump 2.0's economy. We talk a lot about the golden age of America, and right now it seems in a lot of ways to be benefiting Trump first and those who are in his orbit and those who know how to communicate with him and pad their pockets. And I do think at some point you're going to reach a boiling point. We're watching it here in the United States in terms of midterms coming up in the fall to see where the people really stand and if they feel as though their lives are better or worse. And those people are not the 1%, which are doing very well here. And so unfortunately,
Right.
the more that they do benefit,
Well, of course,
they may be buying up more things.
Just to bring it back to the Epstein files, we saw the power there, of course, of journalists and newspapers. Maura Gillespie, Joy Cheney, great to have you on our panel tonight. That's all the time we have for On the Context USA on BBC News.